Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel. It's time to look at the 2025 football schedule as we close in on a month until the season starts. Let's just look at some potential turning points, some toss-up games, tough stretches. We'll go through a little bit of everything here on this edition of On Texas Football. This edition is brought to you by Allegiant Digital Marketing. We'll tell you more about Allegiant Digital Marketing and their CEO, Chad Markham, here later in the show. But we do want to thank Allegiant Digital for their sponsorship of On Texas Football and for this video. CJ, you actually inspired this production because you've been tweeting a lot about the schedule on the ontexasfootball.com message board. You've been active talking about the schedule. So let's talk about it. And I want your take on the Ohio State game, because I know, and maybe he says it during reporting day or whenever he's next available, but at some point in the next month, we will hear Sark say, look, win or lose, both teams will be better from this game, talking about Texas and Ohio State. What's your ultimate 30,000-foot view or the stamp, whatever you want, however you want to couch it? What's your thoughts on the Ohio State game as we sit almost a month out from that right now?
Yeah, it's going to sound weird, but I think the winner of that game is a shoo-in for the playoffs. I don't think that there's a way that the winner of that game could drastically fall off, save a significant injury or three, really. There's going to be enough talent for each team to compete against just about anybody else in the country. And should you win that game, boy, oh boy, does that set up for a lot of room for error on this Texas schedule, right? You still have to go to Florida. You still have to play in Dallas. You still have to go to Athens. And you still get A&M the last weekend of the season, in which, look, a year ago, that game basically was a play-in, or the week leading up, it was a play-in to the SEC championship game. That was the way in which A&M had a chance to make the college football playoff. But I think if you are able to leave Columbus with a win, if you start looking at the 12-team playoff in your resume, in terms of, the NCAA tournament in college basketball, resume wins, quad one wins, that's all they talk about. Well, if you go up to Columbus and you beat Ohio State, well, then you can basically suffer two or maybe even three other losses and say, hey, we knocked off the defending champions week one of the season at their place. That's a good feather in the cap to have, Jeff. So I look at it and say, it's not the end of the season if you fall, but boy, oh boy, does it set you up very well if you succeed and come back with a W.
Expanding on that last point, and granted, it was the last year of the 4-team playoff. We haven't really quite seen how this would play out in the era of the 12-team playoff. But you go back to 2023 and the game in Tuscaloosa, Texas was richly rewarded for winning that ball game. Remember, that was the year Florida State went undefeated, was left out of the playoff. Texas got one of those 4 spots, I think in large part because of that win at Alabama. But likewise, Alabama got into the playoff. They won the SEC, but they weren't punished for losing that ball game in the second game of the season at home to Texas. So it is going to help both teams. I think, like you said, the winner will be richly rewarded. I don't think the loser is going to be punished, because I think both of these teams, obviously there's enough runway for growth because it's the season opener, but I think both these teams are young enough in the right spots that they can grow together. And I think both teams will be much more difficult to deal with by the time you get to November than they will be at the end of August. So, CJ, the Ohio State game's out of the way. Then you've got those 3 non-conference games with San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston, the bye week. And then for me, what is the ultimate turning point game of the season? It's not the game in Athens. It's not Red River. It's not the A&M game. I think it's the game in Gainesville to open SEC play against Florida, because when I look at Florida's roster, I look at a roster that, in terms of both lines of scrimmage, let's just call it line of scrimmage play, trench play, I think Florida's probably in the top quarter of teams in this conference. And if DJ Lagway's healthy, you've got the 2 things you need to win quality ball games in this league. Plus, it's at the Swamp. It's probably going to be a night game. It's going to be, Arch will at least have had the benefit of going to Columbus and starting a game in that atmosphere. But again, it's going to be the Swamp potentially at night. It's the conference opener. We know how serious Sark takes conference play. Not that he would ever take it lightly, but there's just a different attitude, a different aura he has about himself when Texas gets into conference play. To me, CJ, that could be the big turning point of where we see Texas go from there, whether they're really going to struggle to stay in the playoff hunt or they establish themselves as the big dog in the SEC.
Yeah, I know that a lot of folks around that time of the year start looking ahead to Oklahoma. Look, you can't do that with Florida, not this year with the way that you laid it out. Very talented quarterback, great trenches, and that running game with Jaden Baugh is something that you're going to have to bring a lot of passion and intensity to on the road. The one thing that's really interesting is how the schedules kind of shape up to that point, right? Texas, for the most part, won't have to show as much as a Florida going into that game, right? Florida has LSU. They follow that up with Miami, and then they get a bye. So, look, that bye week comes at the perfect time if you're Florida and you have to go face or host the University of Texas, a physical football team, after playing what you expect to be two already very physical and passionate football games with LSU and Miami. The one thing that's interesting is both teams will have a bye. Texas, however, as you mentioned, after Ohio State, they can theoretically coast, right? You don't have to go deep into your bag of tricks if you're Pete Kwiatkowski or Steve Sarkisian. Whereas if you're Florida and Billy Napier, who every single win is as valuable as gold, you're going to have to go into your bag of tricks. You're going to have to show a little bit more of your offense early in the season for a Week 5 matchup, an SEC opener for Texas, than you probably would have anticipated, right? So that's where I think defensively Texas should probably come out with a little bit more of an understanding of what Florida likes to do, especially if Lagway is fully healthy, because they're going to have to show that 2 weeks in a row prior to that Texas game, where Texas will have basically a month to hide a lot of what they want to do in the swamp.
The other thing too, CJ, is depth. Texas will use those 3 non-conference games to establish some depth. You'll see some younger players play, so that way they're ready to, at that point, especially the 2025 signees, it'll be determined which group of guys from that class are going to be able to help Texas. Those will be the guys that travel to Florida, that play high leverage snaps in the swamp, or at the very least they're on special teams. But Florida's depth is going to be taxed in those 2 games, like you said, against LSU and Miami. What kind of shape is Florida going to show up in? At least they've got the bye before then to get ready, but what does Florida's depth look like? Look, they're probably not going to be able to get through LSU and Miami without sustaining some injuries. So the health of their roster, I think it could be in a little more desperate position than Texas. But again, the thing with Florida, to me, it all hinges on DJ Lagway. If DJ Lagway's healthy, I really think he's talented enough to carry them to a win at home, even against a team as talented as Texas. But if something happens to DJ Lagway before that game and he's either not available or far less than 100%, to me, that game becomes a lot less daunting. In other words, CJ, if I'm for my stock on Florida, I'm putting all my eggs in DJ Lagway's basket.
Yeah, I am too. And look, I'd be shocked if that game wasn't at night, as you mentioned earlier. That sets up for probably the best game of the weekend. Florida, Texas, 2 teams that don't play that often. But beyond that, it's DJ Lagway and it's Arch Manning, right? It's the storyline of what could be the battle between the first overall pick and the 2027 draft. And if you're DJ Lagway, he mentioned it at SEC Media Days, but he said, hey, I was pretty upset I didn't get to play at Texas a year ago. And I know a lot of folks around the SEC, specifically in Gainesville, said, hey, that's probably a different game. It just so happens that I watched that game the other day, and I don't know if 42 points is prevented from being put on Florida before halftime. Point being, DJ Lagway is going to have this game circled, especially off of a bye week. And if he's healthy, look, that's a completely different team.
With all due respect to Florida, and again, I just laid out how I feel about DJ Lagway. DJ Lagway didn't play defense for the Gators that day, and Texas was going to put however many points on the board that Sark decided Texas was going to put on the board that day. That might have been, CJ, that might have been the best we saw the 2024 offense look, was that first half against Florida.
Oh, yeah, and there were still 2 or 3 drops that negated a 60-yard touchdown and a 40-yard touchdown. So if Texas can come out firing like that again, then it's going to be a hell of a day for Longhorn fans in the swamp.
CJ, let's talk about our sponsor for this edition of On Texas Football. It's Allegiant Digital Marketing. Are you a business owner who struggles with any of the following? Finding new customers, getting consistent leads, or finding marketing services to promote your business that actually work? Well, founder and CEO Chad Markham with Allegiant Digital Marketing, that's an Austin-based advertising agency, has helped thousands of business owners just like you for over 25 years conquer these same challenges. So if you're ready to start making money in your business and grow with confidence, visit allegiantdigital.com/ontexasfootball and get a free marketing plan. Plus, you can save up to $2,500 in advertising with their Hook 'em Horn special today. Again, that's allegiantdigital.com/ontexasfootball for your free marketing plan. Plus, take advantage of their Hook 'em Horn special to save up to $2,500 in advertising. And we want to thank Chad Markham and Allegiant Digital for sponsoring this edition of On Texas Football. CJ, where are you at with the Oklahoma game because OU, you look at the non-conference schedule, the games leading up to Texas, and really other than Michigan, they've got an opportunity to really get themselves right before they get to Red River. But I don't know, the way Sark coaches that game, I think he learned a lot from that first meeting where it was head-to-head with he and Lincoln Riley in terms of the ebbs and flows of that game and how you have to manage it. And really, if you go back to 2023, the game that Texas lost, think about everything that had to go wrong for Texas and had to go right for Oklahoma, and Texas still had the ball in the second half with a chance to win the game at the end. So I just feel like Texas has a chance where they can, for lack of a better term, kind of squeeze the life out of Oklahoma. It really feels like Texas in a position to take advantage of a vulnerable Oklahoma and go on a run. I know you're a big believer in John Mateer, CJ, but where do you think Oklahoma comes into this game just in terms of the state of their team?
Well, I was going to start with Mateer. Oklahoma's going to have a quarterback that can throw and tie his shoes, right? I mean, it's going to be a functional offense, right? At least it should be if they can stay healthy at the wide receiver spot. Look, Deion Burke's coming back. They like Giovanni Gibson, who's a little dinged up at the moment going into fall camp. The big question mark is that offensive line. It's really been the first year or two in a row in which I've looked at an OU offensive line and said, look, I don't know if they have, Trent Williams. I don't know if they have a Creed Humphreys, a Cody Ford, a guy that I know is going to manhandle people. And when you look at when Texas was really down against Oklahoma, where was the difference? It was in the trenches. It was games in which Sam Allinger was taking 12 sacks, right? It was ugly. And that's what it looked like in 2024 and 2022, especially when OU didn't have a quarterback in that year. So for me, it's the physicality in the trenches. Texas going to Florida kind of be reintroduced to what it takes to win a big SEC caliber football game, I think is very important. Now, don't get me wrong, Oklahoma playing Michigan and then playing Auburn, you're going to get tested, right? Those are going to be two quality tests, but you get Kent State the week before Texas. So yes, in theory, you get the luxury of a 3.5 quarter game if you take care of business for your starters. But do you get that pop in the mouth like Texas will get with Florida that week leading up to things? That's going to be really interesting. But Jeff, we've seen Texas be the underdog and counted out going into these games far too often where they come out super competitive and it's a game that goes down to the wire. You can never count out either team in this game. It's a game of runs, game of momentum. And for Texas, it's all about starting quick and making sure that John Mateer and that offense is playing from behind.
That's the two things that make me nervous about the Oklahoma game. One, it's just the nature of the game. I've seen way too many weird things happen. I've seen way too many instances in this series in my lifetime where the better team did not win the game for a variety of reasons. So just the nature of it makes you nervous a little bit. And two, like you said, and look, Oklahoma plays one game. I'm going to use the term road game very loosely. They play one game away from Norman before they play Texas. It's in Philadelphia against Temple. So again, I'll use the term road game very loosely there. They get Michigan and Auburn at home, and then they get the Kent State game. So for Texas, coming off of the Florida game, the old term I heard Greg Popovich use a long time ago in an NBA playoff series, are you able to fill the cup back up that quickly with that kind of turnaround after a game where the emotional, the mental, the physical capital that you're probably going to have to expend to come out of the swamp with a win? I know it's the OU game, and I'm sure they'll be up for it, but it's the challenge of filling the cup back up. And really, CJ, when you look at the SEC, even though people can say what they want about Texas' schedule last year, that was the challenge. It's week after week. Can you fill the cup back up? Because if you can't, the bottom and even the middle tier teams in this conference are capable of beating you if the stars align. So especially if you've got trench play figured out. And we don't know about Oklahoma's offensive line. Their defensive line's in the discussion to be the best defensive line in the SEC. I'm not going to go out and say that it is definitely the best, but it's probably one of the 4 or 5 best in the SEC, which if it's that, yeah, you're probably in the conversation to have a top 10 defensive line in the country. So I don't worry about that with Oklahoma. Again, for me, can Texas fill the cup back up? And just, man, I've seen way too much weird stuff happen in this game to just be able to speak in absolutes on it.
Yeah, You talk about the games within the game, what dictates a quarter of possession, a drive, points being put on the board. If you're Texas, getting out of the first drive offensively without an interception thrown, that's a big win, because that hasn't been the case the last 2 years, and it's put Texas in some tough situations. But you talk about that front seven. That's going to be a fun matchup with Texas's front seven defensively, the front seven of Oklahoma. Who's able to create more at the quarterback position? A Mateer, a Manning, which wide receivers are able to extend plays down the field or after the catch. Obviously, the big play that comes to mind for me is Xavier Worthy recently catching the first play of the game, a little screen pass and going 75 to the house. Who can do that? Because the trenches and running the football, in my opinion, is going to be very difficult for both teams in this game.
Yes. I think coming out of the Oklahoma game, CJ, Texas needs to have 0 or 1 losses to feel really good about making the playoff. Would you agree?
I agree. I do.
I think against 2, if you got 2 losses, you're really up against it, because at least one of those is going to be a conference loss. Even in the era of the 12-team playoff, weird things can happen. I think you're really up against it, and I don't know how you could feel confident about making the playoff at that point. So let's assume that Texas gets through that portion of the schedule with 0 or 1 losses. You're in contention for a CFP spot. You enter the handle your business portion of the schedule where, hey, man, it doesn't matter how it looks, what you do, you just handle your business and get through Kentucky, Mississippi State, both those on the road, and then Vanderbilt at home. If you do, then you're a 1-loss team or an undefeated team heading into the last 2 weeks of the season, really in a stretch of 13 days. You're going to go to Georgia. You play Arkansas at home, and that could be an Arkansas team. We said the same thing last year, so I'll repeat myself. This could be an Arkansas team with an interim head coach coming to Austin this time to play the game. And then you end with the Aggies. CJ, again, you talk about a 13-day stretch to define your season. You could either solidify yourself a playoff spot, or you could fall off the map within those 13 days.
Yeah, 100%. It's going to be a really close race to the finish if you're Texas. Unfortunately, look, you get the bye going into Athens. That's huge, especially after playing 3 other. I know it's not the highest quality of SEC opponents, but you get to play 3 other quality SEC opponents before that Georgia game. You get that time off, and Sarkisian kind of divvies up his seasons into quarters, right? You're going to be looking at that third quarter essentially with Georgia, Arkansas, and Texas A&M with that extended break to say, all right, let's regroup. We got our plan in place. We got the goal at the top of the mountain. How can we get there? We got to go day by day, game by week, or game by game. But that Georgia game's really interesting because, look, that's basically the monkey on your back right now. And I said it was the most important game of the season if you're Texas. And you could argue Oklahoma. You could argue Texas A&M. I understand it. Rivalries mean a lot. You don't want to lose to those 2 teams. And you probably could throw in Ohio State as well. But if you're Steve Sarkisian, you've walked into Georgia. You've come out with the 2 top recruits in the state of Georgia the last 2 years. You're wanting to knock off Georgia. You got humiliated at home a year ago by Kirby Smart and Georgia. You were a kick or 2 away from winning the SEC championship, but you fell short in overtime. If you want to walk into this conference and be the undisputed team to look at, team to beat, crown on your head, you've got to walk away with a win in Athens this year, especially when you don't yet know if Gunnar Stockton is going to be the guy at quarterback.
Yes. So all that said, CJ, I think when you look at the 12 regular season games, the table setter, the tone setter is Ohio State for obvious reasons. I think some would call it a trap. I'll call it a potential turning point. I think is the trip to Florida. I think the hold on for dear life and don't take anything for granted is Oklahoma. I think Georgia is the chance to make a statement. And the A&M game is wrap this up on a high. Don't let the Aggies be the reason that you're not playing for an SEC championship or that you don't make the college football playoff. So if we're ranking these, CJ, in terms of importance, I'll agree with you 100%. I think Georgia's number 1. I'll put Florida at number 2. I'll put Texas A&M at 3, Oklahoma at 4, and Ohio State at 5. And I only put Ohio State at 5 because, again, that game's not going to win you or prevent you from winning an SEC championship. And I think going back to my original take, I feel like I can go to Vegas and put money on it. we'll hear Sark say something along the lines of, hey, this is going to help both teams at the end of the day. So that's, trust me, in my list, 2 through 5 are as close together as you can be. But I think without question, I'm with you. Without number one, the number one most important game on the schedule is November 15th in Athens, if you want to take that next step as a program.
I agree 100%. The one thing I wanted to end on is that Texas A&M game in Austin, right? First off, hell yeah, that game's back. It's back in Austin. That's going to be pretty darn exciting. But on top of that, look, a year ago, A&M fumbled the opportunity to play for a spot in the SEC championship game, right? They fell, 3 of their last 4 games of the season, 3 straight in the SEC. Evidently, you go 8-4, right? That's what they do. But this year, it's maybe a little bit different, right? You got a returning quarterback. You got a defense you feel pretty confident about. You got an offensive line that you think is going to be atop of the SEC board as well, with Le'Veon Moss and Reuben Owens kind of manning that backfield, that run game. You start with Notre Dame week 3 if you're Texas A&M. Do you win that game? Do you not? Whatever. It's in South Bend. They're a pretty good football team. They return a lot. Mark that up as a loss for me, just for this hypothetical, Jeff. You play Auburn, you play Mississippi State, you play Florida at home. Another tough game, as we've talked about. You go to Arkansas. I think you come away with 3, probably 4 wins if you're Texas A&M of those 4. Then you go to Death Valley and LSU. You go to Missouri, and you get South Carolina at home. Let's say you win 2 of the 3 of those. Now you're looking at a 2-loss A&M going to Austin, in which, if we're talking about hypotheticals, not getting out of Florida, not getting out of Columbus, not getting out of Athens, that game in Austin means significantly more than maybe we ever would have anticipated going into the season. That game is very, very important. And, of course, in typical A&M fashion, right, they get Samford the week before Texas. So it's not like that they're going into another highly anticipated rivalry game where the emotions are high with Arkansas. No, it's Samford, before Texas. So it's going to be really interesting to see what situation they're in, or do they fumble it again in 2025? And that game is basically just to play a thorn in the side of the Longhorns en route to what they believe will be a playoff appearance.
By the way, thanks to Texas A&M and Arkansas both for getting their game out of the sanitized environment that was Jerry World, and it's now going home and home. Thank goodness. I think it got to the point, CJ, I don't think those 2 fan bases cared that it was an AT&T Stadium. I think the novelty wore off long ago. So A&M going to Fayetteville, hey, that's an old school Southwest Conference rivalry, so stamp of approval from me. But just like we talk about, the stretch for Texas that could define the season, that where it's Georgia, Arkansas, Texas A&M, I think for A&M, it's right before they play Texas. It's at LSU, at Missouri, and then a South Carolina team coming to Kyle Field that could very well be in the playoff picture, and maybe Lenore Sellers is planning to solidify a spot in New York for the Heisman Trophy at that point. So that's a really, really big game for the Aggies, just as the game in Columbia was last year. But for Texas, hey, if we're talking about this team having legit national championship aspirations, which I believe they do, I think they are that good, November 15th in Athens at some point, the worm has to turn, and you got to get that win over Kirby Smart in Georgia. And it would be nice if you did it in their backyard in the state of Georgia, going between the hedges to Sanford Stadium. All right, CJ, thank you so much for the knowledge and expertise. As always, thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for producing it. Thank you to Chad Markham and Allegiant Digital Marketing for sponsoring this edition of On Texas Football. If you're not an OTFOG, if you're not hooked up over at ontexasfootball.com, that's okay. You can do it right now. Get over to ontexasfootball.com. Sign up with the promo code OTFOG. That's OTFOG. That'll get you 1 year of access for $39.95. Preseason practice is about to start. Recruiting never stops. There's no better time to be an OTFOG than right now. So again, get over to ontexasfootball.com, sign up for a subscription using the promo code OTFOG, and that'll get you 1 year of access for $39.95. Make sure you like this video and that you're subscribed to the On Texas Football YouTube channel. That way you're staying abreast of everything here digitally with our video product and on the site, where we've got all kinds of good news, notes, and nuggets for all Longhorn fans. For CJ Vogel, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and until next time, welcome.